If you saw my video on the Insta360 X5 versus the Osmo Pocket 3, then you may have noticed a little something that we had going on with the X5 once we put ourselves into a low light environment. To start off, tell me if you can spot which camera is which. I switched both cameras over to program auto exposure because a lot of times that may be how a beginner is using either of these cameras. First of all, take a look at that noise, that motion blur, and the graininess that we get with camera A, with the girl that's in the white dress. When we compare that to camera B, there's a pretty stark difference between the two shots. Next, take a look at the pavers that are in the background and how they're so much mushier with camera A and how much cleaner and more detailed camera B is. I'm also noticing just a lot more noise with the entire shot with camera A in the overall image, whereas camera B looks a lot cleaner to me as far as the grain that we get in the shadow areas. But that was in program auto exposure. What happens when I switch them both over to manual exposure and I set their ISO to 800? Both cameras do seem to perform a little bit better and get a little bit closer with their image quality, especially when we look at all of the different colors. But if we narrow down on the signs, I do see some pretty big differences. First, take a look at the saturation that is in the signs, particularly that one red movie sign right in the middle. It literally looks red with camera A, whereas camera B, it has a little bit more of an orange color to it. That tells me that both of these cameras really start to differentiate on color science once we get into low light or night environments and we're using higher ISOs. With that being said, I do like the way that camera A almost has a bloom effect around these signs where the neon lights are, whereas camera B almost has a cleaner, more streamlined, less bloom effect going on with its particular lens. I love doing comparisons like this because we really get to see where both of these cameras start to fall apart. This video is not being sponsored by Insta360 or by DJI. In fact, this video doesn't have a sponsor at all. If you'd like to support the channel and you own one of these cameras, consider purchasing one of my new camcorder LUTs that I just released. It'll change the footage that you get with both of these cameras from a digital look to an early 2000s camcorder look. That look is really making a comeback. I'll leave a link to that LUT pack in the description. However, if you don't own either of these cameras, I created a free project file pack where you can download the footage that I got with both of these cameras and edit that footage in your editing software. This way you can see how that footage performs. I'll leave a link to that free project file pack in the description. Today, we're gonna look at how both of these cameras perform in different night environments. The same type of environment that a fast-paced content creator might find themselves in. I'm gonna switch Pure Video Plus on for a couple shots with the X5 to see if that helps up its game while we're shooting in their flat and log profiles. We're also gonna look at both cameras' dynamic range to see how they recover the highlights and the shadows. I'm gonna do a skin tone test while we're vlogging with both of these cameras with nearly no light at all. Then I'm gonna jump in front of a street lamp and use the ambient light to see if that increases the image quality. We're gonna check out their stabilization and how well they work in a night environment. We're gonna take a closer look at that lens bloom effect that we saw with those movie posters. We're gonna look at their ISO grain and see what both cameras produce on that front, along with testing out different ISO ranges, starting with 100 and cranking it up to 1600, which is about as far as I would go with both of these cameras, along with many other tests and comparisons. We're gonna do all of that so you can make an informed purchasing decision. Today, on the Film Alliance. Now for the results of our test. If you thought camera A was the Insta360 X5, then you were correct. If you were able to figure out which camera was which, please let me know how you knew in the comments below. Because I created an entire Osmo Pocket 3 course, I've shot a ton with this thing. I knew exactly what the image quality looks like, especially when we're shooting at night. I could pick out the Osmo Pocket 3. And I could really tell a difference when I opened it up to the full screens and I didn't just do the side-by-side windows. By the time this video is concluded and you're still not sure which one of these two cameras you should pick up, I made a free camera quiz that will ask you a series of questions and then funnel you to the camera that best suits your needs. I'll leave a link to that free quiz in the description. Now at ISO 100, both cameras are really being pushed here. The X5 looks softer with more of a reddish tint, while the Osmo Pocket 3 holds on to just a bit more clarity. The X5 gives more of a magenta cast in the shadows, and some of those lights start to bloom a bit. But the detail in the storefronts are pretty hard to make out. And with the Pocket 3, I'm seeing a little bit more structure in the highlights, and the shadows aren't quite as crushed. They're still dark, but overall just a cleaner image. At ISO 800, things start to get a little bit interesting. The Insta360 X5 gives us a warmer tone across the board, while the Osmo Pocket 3 keeps the whites looking much cleaner and more neutral, at least in my opinion. Now at ISO 1600 in this wider street view, the Insta360 X5 pulls a bit warmer and we start to see some of that bloom around the highlights, and that would have been one of the reasons why I could tell the difference in those beginning shots. The Osmo Pocket 3, on the other hand, looks a little bit more controlled. The X5 has some of that glow bleeding into the signage and the string lights, and while it's capturing the scene, we're definitely losing some definition in the shadows and the edges. The Pocket 3, on the other hand, keeps the highlights tighter and the blacks feel deeper without completely crushing the detail. Overall, it just looks more refined, especially in that neon that we see in the shop windows. The Insta360 X5 does use its full sensor when we're in the 360 mode, or both sensors, but in single lens mode, it crops heavily, so you lose a lot of that dynamic range and the detail and overall image quality compared to when you're using the 360 8K. I chose to use the X5 in single lens mode to avoid the extra workflow that I would have to throw it through the Insta360 app, and then after I exported the 360 footage, it still would end up as a flat 16:9 image, so that's why I just used the single lens mode. In this auto headlight shot, you can really start to see a difference in how each camera handles the fast motion in low light. The Insta360 X5 comes off a bit softer and more washed out. The X5 struggles with detail here. The red color of the car bleeds into the shadows, and there's a noticeable blur around the headlights and the headlight glow. It feels like I'm fighting to keep up. Whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 holds the detail in the car body a lot better, and the highlights don't bloom as much. There's more sharpness overall, especially in the headlights and the pavement texture. In this handheld walk through the city type of shot, the difference in dynamic range really stands out. The X5 is struggling with the noise in the shadows, while the Osmo Pocket 3 keeps things a bit cleaner and more detailed. The X5 has more motion blur and grain in the darker areas, and those warm light surfaces feel a lot muddier. It's usable, but you start to lose a lot of definition in the textures. On the other hand, the Pocket 3, I can actually make out more in the faces and in the building details. The shadows hold together better, and the overall image just feels sharper and more stable. While we're looking at all these different night shots, I thought it'd be a good idea to run these cameras through a color checker so that we can see really what's going on in a controlled lighting environment. Both cameras are pretty close at first glance, but there are some clear differences. The Insta360 X5 leans cooler with lifted shadows, while the Osmo Pocket 3 has more of a neutral contrast. The X5 pushes some of those colors slightly blue and green, and the midtones feel a little bit too bright for my liking, especially in the background. It's got a pop, but it's not that accurate. The Pocket 3 looks more balanced across the board. The reds and the greens are a lot cleaner, the shadows stay grounded, and the overall tone just feels a little bit more true to life. Now let's take that information back to the night comparison. In this highlight shadow recovery shot, we've got a bright light source on the wall and deep shadows all around. The Insta360 X5 struggles to hold the detail in both of those areas, while the Osmo Pocket 3 finds more of that middle ground. On the X5, the highlights around the light start to clip and the darker areas get a lot muddier. You lose a lot of that texture that you see in the wall and the roofline. But the Pocket 3 preserves more detail in that bright spot without totally crushing the shadows. It's not perfect, but it's more of a balanced roll-off from highlight to dark. In this ISO grain test, you can really see how each sensor handles the noise. The Insta360 X5 has a ton of visible grain in the sky, while the Osmo Pocket 3 seems to be much cleaner. The X5's shadows are crawling with noise, and you start to lose that deeper blue tone in the sky. The colors feel more blotchy, especially around the flag and the tree line. The Osmo Pocket 3, on the other hand, keeps the sky nice and smooth, and even in the darker parts of the image, it holds on to that rich color without introducing too much noise. Now in this lens bloom test, I'm hoping by now you can tell which one is the X5. The X5 has way more of a glow around each bulb, while the Osmo Pocket 3 keeps the bloom much tighter. The X5 gives off this hazy halo around the lights, and it kind of bleeds into the surrounding branches and signage. It does give a dreamy look, maybe that's something that you're going for, but it's not very controlled. It's not like I can turn that on or off. The Pocket 3 handles it a lot better. Each light feels more isolated, and the tree branches stay sharp even within the highlights of the frame. It just looks cleaner overall, in my opinion. This neon light shot really shows how each camera handles tricky lighting. The Insta360 X5 pulls more purple into the shadows, while the Osmo Pocket 3 gives us deeper blacks and more accurate reds. On the X5, the red neon sign starts to blow out a bit, and some of that shadow areas lean a little bit more noisy. You lose contrast in the surrounding storefronts as well. The Pocket 3 keeps that neon sharp and the scene more grounded. There's better color separation in the buildings, and the shadows don't feel nearly as washed out or noisy. But when I turn Pure Video Plus on with the Insta360 X5, we should see it outperform the Osmo Pocket 3, at least in this exterior detail test, and it definitely does make a big difference. The X5 now shows cleaner highlights, and the colors in the mosaic really pop. The glow around the lights is still there, but it's toned down, and overall it feels more dialed in than the previous shots. The Pocket 3 still holds its own though. The shadows are richer a little bit, and there's a bit more of bite in the blacks, but compared to the X5 here, it looks a touch flatter. And with Pure Video Plus still turned on for the Insta360 X5, we're now looking at an overall shadow recovery. And right away, it looks like the X5 is starting to catch up to the Pocket 3. We also shot this in log and in flat. The X5 pulls a brighter image overall with more visible detail in the trees and the pavement, and there's still a bit of softness, but the image isn't falling apart like it did in the earlier shots that we've seen. The Pocket 3 still edges out slightly in color separation and contrast in my opinion. The blacks are a bit deeper and there's less of a digital haze, so to speak, but this is the closest that we've seen them get so far. But in this skin tone test at night, the Osmo Pocket 3 absolutely blows the Insta360 X5 out of the water. You can see right away the difference is kind of wild. The X5 looks super soft. The skin tones lean orange and the image just feels like it's struggling to lock on. There's so much noise going on in my face and it almost makes it unusable. Whereas the Pocket 3 is still sharp, the tones are natural, and it handles the ambient light way better. Although there is some noise with the Osmo Pocket 3, it's not as bad as the X5. You can actually see my face and surroundings clearly with the Pocket 3. It's no contest on this one. Then I went to a street lamp directly lighting the scene, lighting my face. The results are a lot closer now. The Insta360 X5 holds up much better here compared to the last skin tone test where we didn't have any light really. The X5 still pushes a bit of magenta in the highlights and there's some softness around the edges, but overall the color feels more accurate and the detail is way more usable. Although I don't think the skin tones look as good as with the Osmo Pocket 3. The Pocket 3 still looks sharper and a little bit more natural, especially in the shadows, but this one's tight. It really just comes down to which look you personally prefer. In this stabilization test, both cameras actually held up very well. The Insta360 X5 uses electronic stabilization, while the Osmo Pocket 3 has a built-in mechanical gimbal, and surprisingly, they're pretty evenly matched here. Normally when you turn electronic stabilization on, you're gonna get a degraded image quality, but the X5 was able to pull out. The X5 does show a bit more motion blur in the darker parts of the image, but the actual stability of the frame is right on par with the Pocket 3. The Pocket 3 has a slightly sharper look overall, but in terms of shake and control and handheld performance, I'd still call this one pretty much a tie. After testing both of these cameras out across various real-world scenarios shooting at night, it's clear, in my opinion, that the Pocket 3 consistently beats out the Insta360 X5. Not only in image quality, but also in skin tones and color accuracy. While the X5 does have moments where it closes the gap, particularly when we turn on Pure Video Plus, it still struggles in the shadow recovery, the grain response, and highlight control, and that's when I'm using the single lens mode. With that being said, both cameras have their strengths, and that's what I was talking about at the very beginning of the video. It became very apparent when I shot with this in low light that it wasn't holding up to the Osmo Pocket 3, and the less light that we gave this thing, the more the image quality degraded, whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 was able to maintain a decent image quality. With that said, both cameras have their strengths and their weaknesses, and for creators looking for convenience and strong stabilization, either one could work. But if you're focused on getting the cleanest and most reliable image straight out of camera, then I would say pick up the Osmo Pocket 3 because it took the win for these night shots. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. I'll see you in the next one. One of the most asked questions I receive is which camera should I buy? I know that you want to make the right decision, and it is a big decision. You want to find the camera that best suits your needs and stays within your budget. Many of you know which camera might be good for you, but you need some guidance pinpointing it and feeling confident in your decision. That's why I made this course. I want to put my camera experience and knowledge into a compact and easy to follow format. This course is jam-packed with camera buying fundamentals that I guarantee you will carry with you through the rest of your camera journey. I base this course on all the things that I wish I had known or someone had told me when I first started out. From understanding different camera types and their features to matching them with your specific needs, this course covers it all. After finishing, I'm confident that you're gonna have clarity over every angle and aspect that you must consider when you're shopping for a camera. I'll guide you through my entire process, taking you 90% of the way there. This way you'll be well prepared to make your decision. This is essentially all the guidance that I would give my own brother if he asked, "Hey Joe, which camera should I buy?" Now I'm sharing that insight with you. I'll see you in the first module.